I'll get those grades in addition to your lab grades. Starting a new slide deck for our next area that we're going into. Actually, we've already kind of started that area, but we're going into Python here. But so rather than having new slides, I thought what we would do is spend today just talking about code. And in particular, one thing that we have been doing in class is, if I can get to my terminal, I can just give you an idea about what we're doing. In fact, I have to actually load this up again. But what we've been doing in class, though, is we have been using Python to run basically queries in a database. And the big obvious question that we should that just should roll out of our mouths when someone asks us, why would you care about using something like Python to actually run a database? Why would you want to do that? Why would you want to add extra work for yourself? I mean, you already have to design this thing, and then you have to write up the code that does the queries. Why do that? Well, the reason why we would do that is because we may have so many different things that so many different tables that we have to worry about, that we can't always type in all these commands here. And so we're still working on this database here called mycampus.SQL3 here. And while we don't have that many tables in here, we do have actually a lot of information inside each of these tables. So for instance, if I type in, for instance, select all from, what we have, instructor, I guess. You can see that, there's a bunch of stuff in here. And it does take me some time to type in these commands. Just think about that for a second here. Imagine, for instance, that you have, imagine you have people working with your database here, and they're typing in commands. Imagine, for instance, the time that it takes you to type in this command, or for instance, the time that it would take you perhaps to make sure that the code is correct, or to train somebody to actually be able to code. What I'm saying is that there's a lot of places where it could go wrong when you're working with your database. And so we have all these attributes here to worry about when we're actually looking for a specific piece of information in the table. And so if the persons who are running your database, if they are typing in code and they get one of these attribute names wrong, supposing they're trying to look at the student table here, and they mistype one of these attribute names, then it just takes a long time to kind of figure out what the error is. And so what we're going to do now is, we've been kind of talking about this before, but we have these pieces of code that I've been giving you, a simple query to, for instance, when you just run this thing, it just gives us the information that we want. And so we're using Python now actually to manage our database. And so this means that this program that I just ran here called simple query 2, which you should have, this is from last, I don't know what it was, I guess the last pull. This is a piece of code that just goes into your database, it connects with the database, and then it puts forth some queries, and then allows us to kind of, to work with the database. Notice we don't have to type any code in to make this happen, because Python knows the code for us. In fact, all I need to do is just push run, and then I get all this information coming out. Now I have two different versions of the same program. One is just in black and white, or in my case, it's blue and white. And the reason I have that, I have the ones in color and the ones in blue and white, is because sometimes when you're trying to figure out what's being printed out and you have it in color to look at, it's sometimes much easier. So if I know that if I know that my output's always going to be in yellow, then in my code I can look out for that yellow tag and see what's going to happen there. And so sometimes it helps you to organize your thoughts when you're writing code. If it doesn't help you, then that's okay. Don't worry about it. I'm not expecting you to write code in color here. That's okay. So I thought what we would do today then is I thought we would spend some time to actually do some coding, some more coding, to kind of extend something like this just a little bit here. And what I wanted to do is actually primarily, you'll see that I wanted to clean up this code a little bit. You'll see that it's just line by line by line, and it's kind of confusing. And I'm actually, honestly, I'm getting a slight headache just looking at this code right now. And so what I wanted to do was to make this code a little bit more kind of industry standard, I guess you could say. I know that sounds kind of self-important, but what I'm saying is that we're going to add some functions. We're going to add some functions, and then we're going to add some other information here, and some other ways of coding. And what I want to do is I want to make a program, and we'll do this all together, all of us here. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to add a piece of code here that actually kind of gives me. It will go through the database, whichever database I'm working with, And then it could ask me, for instance, what the name of the table is that I want to query. And so all I have to do is type in the name of the table. Or what it could do is it just goes through every table and it will just pick out, simply give me a query of every table in my database. Now, maybe that's not useful right now, but the code would be useful because you can always use that code and modify it for other things later. So I'm going to get out of this and then get into the editor where I think everything will be a little bit easier to read. And so if I go to this editor here, hopefully you can see where I am. I'm going to save this. I have to, first of all, I start my editing project here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually save this. Where can I save this? I'm going to save this in a directory. I'll just call this, I call this auto query version 1.py. So give yourself a title name. And once you have that, then you're able to kind of get a view on what's, actually, you can start, you can start typing your code. But what I'm saying is, the first thing you might want to do is, I hope you can read this. Maybe you can read this. But the first thing that you want to do, though, is you want to have an idea about, like, what the, where you're storing your file. And so then once the file has been stored, you've given it a name, then you can just start typing your code and just keep pushing save, and so you don't lose this. I'm not going to worry about sending this into GitHub right now, though, so I don't have to worry about any of this other, like the settings that you might have at the bottom here. You do have some settings down here. I'm not going to go through those, but I recommend looking into them for yourselves, because as you are working with GitHub or projects here, as you're writing code for GitHub, you can actually just save your code locally, but also click on a button down here and have your code be sent over to GitHub automatically. Now, remember, just one more thing before I actually get started. When you are writing your code, you really do want to keep sending your code, like line by line, if you will, and as many times as you possibly can to GitHub. Don't wait until the final code is written and done and the whole project is sealed and approved before you send it into GitHub. Because when you do that, there are so many changes in your code that any one of them could have been something that broke something else. And so it's very difficult to go back and find out exactly what change you made the problem, if a problem exists, what made that problem happen. And so what I mean by this is that what I'm doing is I tend to push my code probably once every 10 minutes. I know that sounds a little bit obsessive, but actually it's not bad, because I mean in 10 minutes you can do a lot of work on your code, and if I'm going through my code and I find out that something has broken, then that's actually kind of a problem, because then I have to find out, well, what did I possibly do that broke this thing? Well, if I have like a history of all the things that I've ever done on GitHub, then I don't have to look very far to find out exactly what I've done. Okay, so anyway, enough about that. I think you all know how to develop code here, but that's just an idea. What I'm going to do is I'm going to first of all type in my beginning code here just to kind of get my environment ready. And what this is going to do is Python 3. This is supposed to run my code. If you're using Python in your Docker container, in other words, your in a Unix environment, what this means is that it allows your file to be an executable file in some ways. So you can actually run your Python script files without having to type in Python before the file name. But there's another command I have to show you before we can actually make use of this. But I always just add this to my code just because. Okay, now what I'm going to do is, let's see, I need to figure out some system here. Let's first of all gather a list of tables here. And so my objective here is to show me the tables of the database. That's my first objective here. But before I can actually do that, I have to, first of all, I have to open the database connection. If I can spell this, that'd be good. But before I can do that, I have to install, or I guess I have to import the SQLite 3 library to make all the database connections possible. And so the first thing I need to do is to import that library, and that's going to be a very simple command. In fact, you've probably done this without even recognizing what you're doing with other pieces of code here. But that's that statement that we had where we had to import SQLite 3. That's all it was there. It's just this piece here, and what that really means is that you are able to now use the code that comes with working with SQLite 3 that exists in Python. I guess that wasn't a very good way of saying it. But what I'm saying is like there's extra code that you can use to actually integrate. You can actually integrate code from another library or this SQL database library so that you can run with you can actually use that code in your own work. Okay, so now the next thing we need to do is, you guessed it, we need to actually open our library that we're going to, or sorry, open our file that we're working with. Now, the file that we're going to be working with, in fact, what I need to do is to actually ensure that I have the file there. Hang on a second here. I'm going to be using this file here called, we're using the campus DB file here. And so that file, I need to actually make sure that that file actually exists in my directory. Hold on a second, guys. I'm copying the file into my local directory so that I have it there. That's because otherwise, if I don't, that would be, I won't be able to run this file. And so I'm actually going into my database, I'm going to my files. And I am looking for the actual database builder. And now I am building that file. Hopefully it's building now. Yep. Okay, and so now I have this file, and it's this SQL3 file. Right. Okay. So it's this file. So I've just built this file right here, this campus database file. So what I'm trying to say is, wherever you're working, for instance, if you're where I'm saving my file, and I don't know if you can see this, you can't see this, but what I'm saying is that where I am working, where I'm saving this file here, I have this file, my database file, waiting there for me. Now, remember, I don't need to actually have the file like that. This is going to be a string that I'm using here, and I'll call this DB file name, and this is going to be a string. And one more thing, that, I know that this kind of looks insane. You're probably wondering, why would anyone write code in such a way where they have this underscore str? If you've been in my classes before, then perhaps you know why. But I do this because if I have this underscore str, that tells me that this is a string. That means it's not an integer, it's not a float. But it actually does help when it's when you're working with your variables, trying to figure out what these variables are. How do you work with them? Because the code that you'd use to write or to work with a string is different from the code that you'd use with an integer or a floating point. It's just different code. And so having this tag here, string, reminds me that this is a string. I mean, of course, I can see that it's a string here. But later on down in the bottom of the code, when I'm working with this, it might be nice to know this is a string, or it's a list, or it's something else, so on and so forth. Okay, now what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to have a simple print statement here. I'll just say, I don't know what I'm going to say here, something like a little box here to make it look cool. I'm going to say the database is, and you might want to have something like this just to help it, to help you kind of remember what database you're actually working with, because I'm thinking that when you work with this code here, when you're working with code like this, you're probably going to have multiple databases that are going to be opened at any one time, and so it's always good to have some kind of print statement at the top here just to say, to remind you that this is the database that I'm working with. Otherwise, if you don't have that, you're going to be working with you won't remember, and that it does actually happen. I know that sounds ridiculous, and this is something that that Grandpa would have problems with, but not me. But actually, you do tend to forget what databases you're working with, especially if you have 4 or 5 on the go, like I did when I was working on my research. I had 2 different databases for proteins, 2 different databases for types of cells, and then a 5th one rather, to bring all those databases together. And so I needed to have something like this to remind me what database I was actually working with. Now you can always turn it off later if you want, but that's okay. So now that we've established the library, we've established the name of the database, we still have to remember, we still have to actually load or open that database. I mean, we still have to say, okay, well, the database is here. Let's just go ahead and open it. And so the command for that is going to be one of these. Let's find it here. We have to, let's see, where is it? We have to, it's called this, we have to connect the database here. And so we're going to make a variable which I'll call con, which means connect. And then we have this SQLite lite3. Now that's the library. So then we're going to have something called connect. And that just means establish the network here. I mean, or open up open the bridge to the database here, and establish a kind of a network where we can get into that database. And then, so inside here, we have to put something inside this connect. And what is that? That's going to be this string here, which, remember, is going to be the name of, it's going to be the actual file name. And so this command in itself here is supposed to say, okay, I'm connecting to the database. This is the file that I'm going to be using. And this file, actually, this is a variable. This variable actually points to, has been defined over here, which points to this name. And so that means that really we're connecting to this. Now, you're probably wondering, why not just put this in directly? I could have hard-coded it like this. But if you're in computer science, you tend to frown on hard-coding. I mean, after all, it's the same information, isn't it? Here we have the name of the file, and here we have the name of the file. And so why do I involve this variable here? Well, I involve that variable because I may have a statement somewhere, I might want to amend this code in some way, where, for instance, a user can choose the database, or maybe the name of the database will change or something, and I want people to be able to type that in. I might have a statement that says, please enter the database name, and then once that database name has been loaded, then it will then connect here. If you're working with 5 different databases, you don't necessarily want to hard code those names in there. So for now, I think I'll just leave it the way it is when I have this variable. But keep in mind, though, that when you have a variable in this, that means that you don't have to worry about changing this code. How you actually assign this variable is left to your creativity. Maybe this is a command line option. Maybe this is something else. Maybe you can use a file picker, which is like a panel where you can just like click on the files that you want, and then this will then, or that file picker will assign the name of the file to this variable here, which will then be opened in turn by this. It's really up to you. So you have all that. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is, I'm just lazy, I'm just going to go ahead and copy this piece of information out here. Actually, maybe I won't copy that. Should I copy it? I guess I could. Database is open. Okay, I don't probably need this down there. I'll just say the database is open. And so that's my way of saying that if this line over here runs, then after that, this line over here is going to be printed, so that helps me to kind of get an idea about where in the code I am. There are other ways of actually doing this, but this is just my way of doing this. And then, of course, once I'm actually ready to publish, so-called publish this software, that means the software is running and I don't need to do anything more to it, then I'll just turn these lines off. Anyway, I'm taking some time here to get onto this. The next thing I need to do is I need to go ahead and figure out, let's see, I want to have the, where are we on? Show me the names, okay, the names of the tables here. So the tables we have, that's basically a query. And so in order to do that, we have this, I know this seems kind of crazy here, but my table query is going to be kind of extraordinary, so you'll see this. Unfortunately, when you type in, when we go into SQLite and we type in .tables, then we see these tables. But apparently, that doesn't work when you're working with this library SQLite 3. For some reason, it just doesn't work. And so how to get around that is you're supposed to change your query, and the query that we're actually writing here is, if you can just hold on and suspend your disbelief here, but actually it's select name from SQLite, and then it's master, yep, where type is equal to table. And then we have this, and I have to put a semicolon at the end. This is an extraordinary thing. In fact, if you just go ahead and type that into your terminal, I believe that it should still make things run just as fine, or just as well. In fact, I can even try that. Let's just see what it looks like if I go here. Hold on a second. Just lost my bash. Apologies. There we go. Now it's on my screen anymore. Okay. Okay, so if I go to, for instance, let's write SQLite 3 here, and I go into my campus DB. This extraordinary thing I just typed in gives us it's a query that gives us the name of the tables. So if I try and pipe in, at least in older versions of SQL, maybe it works now, but in the ones that's the traditional versions, I could never get this thing to work. It just never works. And so I think that if you just type in the actual selection statement here, where I'm saying select the name, which is like your that's like your global variable here for the names of the tables here, and this is like the in SQLite here you have this SQLite master table, which is really the like your I guess it's the table that's read by the schema, and so where type is equal to table, this is doing some internal parsing where it's saying, okay, well give me everything here, but show me where the tables are. I wonder if you can just show here. Okay, so this is like your internal, when I type in this command here, this is like your internal command that just tells you what the tables are that are actually located in your database. It's not as nice, for instance, as typing in table, and I believe that table is a kind of a macro in SQLite 3 here, which does essentially this. It's just the same. It's a macro for this. Now, this macro, the dot table command here exists only in SQLite, so we have to actually put this into Python. Okay, so let's go back and see what we can do about that. So if I go here, I'm going to go, so I have my special query. Now, the next thing I need to do is that query then must go into, I mean, remember what we've always had to do here. We've always had to like kind of collect some results here. So I'll call this the results. Oops, results. Oops. And this is going to be a list. My handwriting here, or my typing is just terrible today. What we need to do is I want to make a function here that just basically runs my query. And now this is different here. Everything that we've talked about today is the same. But I want to make a function here that just runs my query. And so to do that, I have to call on this. I have to take this connection over here and send it to new code. And I put that code. Hang on a second. Let me just type this in here. I'll have another parameter here where I have the query itself. And so what I'm trying to say though is I have this function that I want to create here because I might want to be running not just this query here, but a bunch of other queries here. And so I want to be able to have just one piece of code which handles my queries. And that means that if anything goes wrong with my code, if anything happens where I've made a mistake or something, or maybe there's an error in my code, then I can go back to one specific place in my code and fix that error rather than having to go, as we saw before, and look all over the code and see what was going on. And so I'm going to make this one place here called run query. Maybe what I'll do is I'll put this just above here for now, but really it's a good convention to put your functions at the very top of the code so that you can get them later, and then these pieces of spaghetti code can just exist someplace else. But I'll just write it here for now. And so in Python, when you're defining a function, you want to type in def, which means define. Your open and close parentheses. Now this is going to be my first parameter, con, and my second parameter is going to be, you guessed it, my query. Now, I should tell you something that this and this, as soon as I define this query up here in this function, it's no longer, it's a copy of this, in other words. This is then sent to this function here, where the function can look at it and work with it. But once the function is finished, then this copy goes away. And so that's one of the things you have to worry about. You have to return values if you're going to be returning values. Another thing in Python is that when you're defining this function, you have to have this semicolon, a colon at the end. And one thing I do, which some of my students might think is just really kind of old man-ish, but I always put an end of run query or something, an end of statement at the bottom of my function. I do that because it's like the ending curly brackets for working with Java. It helps you to see where the end of this function is. And while this is a lot of extra work to have to add right now, later on when you're working with like seemingly, 20, 30 different functions in a piece of code, having these ending pieces here actually do help to kind of relieve the headaches that you may have when coding. Another thing I do, which not always happens, is I add what's called a doc string, which is a doc string. And a doc string is really a piece of information to say what this thing is. What is this function? So you can put something like that in there. But I mean, you want to actually put something that's more meaningful than that. And so I'll just type in, for instance, something meaningful, a function to perform my queries automatically. Something like that. So now I have this doc string, and so when you're debugging it on certain debugging platforms, it will. I'm thinking of like certain types of like PyCharm, for instance, and other types of editors, and even this one, this editor here. As you're looking through all the functions that you have, it will show you the name of the function, and then it will read you this doc string, and this helps you to remember what this thing is and what this thing is. Now, when you only have like 2 functions in your program, it doesn't really make any difference because you just know what they are. But I'm used to making programs where I had, 30 functions in my program. And they all do small things, but I just need to remember which one is which. Otherwise, it's just going to be a mess. And it was a mess, and so I spent all this time like just fretting over this whole thing. Okay, so anyway, so we've just created our function here, and I hope that everyone's with me on this. It doesn't take much time here. But basically what I like to do now is I'm going to be making something called results. And I think this is actually going to be, actually I'm not sure if this is a list or not, so just leave it as result. But I'm going to type this con, and then I have this, remember, execute. Remember the command we had here, this con execute? Well, the con, that's the connection to our database, which comes by way of this. And then we have in con, it's a built-in command in SQL here, which allows us to execute. And execute is going to run this query, because the query is just a string that we just pipe into this thing, and then that's that. And then what I'm going to do is, once I have the results in here, I know there's probably more efficient ways of doing this, but I'm going to have to, there's another thing I have to do, which is results dot fetch all. Remember that? Fetch all is going to be one of those things that's going to, it parses through these results that you get out of here, which are not human readable, and then it makes them human readable by running them through this command here. So fetch all actually does some parsing. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to return whatever happens to results.fetchall. So results.fetchall, result is my variable, which comes from here. This variable I'm going to use has an object here, which is fetchall, which means now I can kind of like switch this option on for this variable, which comes out of this execute. And this is it's going to give me the actual human readable text from my query. And so now I need to return this human readable text back to where I'm working. And that's really all that there is to that. And so then if I go back to here, run query, well, what happens here? So when I run query, I have this connection which I send. I send my query string that I've just created, which is this guy up here. And then what it's going to do is it will send all that to my function. The function is going to run the query, and it's going to parse my results, and then it's going to return to me whatever it finds, and then when it returns, it will land in this results underscore list. This I do know is a list, which means now I can go ahead and just kind of get some ideas about what's, I can actually view my list. One more thing I'll do is that I want to kind of like have another function here that kind of makes it easy for me to see what my results are. So I'm just going to call this, I'm going to make my own parser here. So I'm going to have this def parse results, and I'm going to have like I'll just have something that's, I need to define a variable here, so I'll just make this up. I'll just call this incoming results, oops, what have I just done here? I just clicked on something. Results, R-E-S-U-L-T, results, and then I'll call this lists. I know this is a list now. It helps me when my programs, if I know that this variable is a list, it helps me to actually write lists so that it helps me to work this through. I'll put my end of, so I have that here. Next what I'm going to do is I'm going to have this for index in results list print, and then I'm going to have a, I don't know, my I here. And don't forget the F. You must have the F here in order for you to use these brackets here. I think that'll work, actually. I think that'll work. The only thing is now I need to connect this function here to my code. And so what I'm going to do now is I'll just say, for instance, I'm going to call this function parse results, and I'm going to give it this. I'm going to give it this variable here. And so I'm hoping that with any luck, when I save this deal, I can go ahead and just run this. And so let us go back, and I'm going to cross my fingers, and I'm going to see whether I can get. Oops, I have to exit this. Where's the file I was just working on? Hopefully it's, shoot. Is it this one here? I don't think it's this one. Sorry, it's not this one. It's in my working. This is the file I was just working on. I made a copy of everything just to be safe. And the file I was working on was, I think, this one here called AutoQuery. This makes sense. The file is 1203. So I'm going to go ahead and run this. Gosh, I'm really kind of scared here. Ah, it does work. It does work. So I've now created a piece of code which just goes through my database and automatically pulls out the names of these, the names of my tables. Now it looks ugly. We can clean that. We can clean that up a bit, make it look a bit better. In fact, we need to clean this up because if we are going to go through and do a query on the teachers, departments, instructor, student, course table, we can't just pipe in this as we see it. Instead, we have to type in, or pipe in only the word teachers, only the word department, only the word instructor, student, course. The rest of this stuff is just line noise, which is going to confuse our code. So that must be removed. So I'm going to go ahead and get back to my, there we are. I'm going to go back to this, and we will then work on that. So what can I do then? So how do I actually remove some of this text here? Well, what we need to do is remember that this is actually a list that we're getting here. And so, well, this is just going to be kind of like extraordinary to see here. Maybe it won't make any sense just yet, but hopefully it will. What I need to do is I'm going to create a temporary, let me just show you something here. Going back to this. This stuff down here is a kind of a list, but it's an embedded list. That means that this teachers, departments, instructor, students, course, we can actually get that information out, but we have to go inside a list and then go inside another kind of list inside there. So we have to play with our data structure. And that is really where a lot of time is, I find for me, a lot of time is spent trying to get this thing to work, just by messing around with the code. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a temporary list, which I'm allowed to do, because I mean that's just how it works. And I do this, and this is like create a temp list. When you have these brackets as you do here, that means to make a list. If I have something like this, this is making a set, or it's a dictionary. But here I know this is actually a list. And so I can remember that this is a list because in my variable declaration, I actually have the underscore list to help me remember what it is. Now, next what I need to do is, because what comes out, in fact, if I just, let me just show you something. I'll leave that for a second here. Print, I just want to print out this output here just so I can see what it looks like. And I also want to know what type it is. I'm going to see what it is. So I'll say here, my output is, and is of type, I think this might actually make things worse, really messy on my screen here. But if I type in the word type and put the word, put my variable inside there, I can see whether it's a string or I can see what it is. Excuse me. So I can go into, I can do all these things. And so if I run this again, here we go. It's a type list. But this is actually the most important piece here that I wanted to show you, and that is that you can see that this is the data structure that you're working with. Now let me just show you something here as a trick that you can do, which is, which probably, it's kind of a sloppy way of coding here, but you can actually play around with your code. And that is that if you just go ahead and type in Python directly, and I'll say s is equal to, not quotes, but s is equal to this, I can type in type s. Remember, s is this. I just copied and pasted this from my output up here. I just copied that in here, and now I can work with this code and kind of play around with things and see what I can do. So I'll say I'm going to just iterate through this for I in s print, and I know this is getting kind of crazy here. I don't need to confuse anybody. but I'll explain everything once I've got this thing through. But once it's, let me just get it in here first. Okay, so I can now iterate through my list because after all, hopefully you know what I mean by lists here. But in a list, basically everything is each element is separated by this comma. There's another comma here, another comma here. Oops, not that one. This one. Oops, there we go. And so this chunk of stuff in here represents this strange data structure in which a piece of text is being held, and it's being embedded in an array or a list, as they call them in Python. So an array is a list, and a list is an array, but it's just a different thing here. But so really what I want to do is I want to go inside and actually pull out this word. And so what can I do here? Well, tell you what, if I know, for instance, that I can type, if I type in S, for instance, and actually go after each of these, oops, hang on a second, how do I do this here? Type in I again. What I can do is I can type in another one of these things here. S, I think it's 0 next. I'm going to now list, and this is a trick here, and you don't need to worry about if you don't see how this works together right now, don't worry about it, but just remember that it does work. I'm going to go through my list as an ordered as a range here. That means that I'm going to be counting through the pieces of my list, piece by piece. So this is what I've done here. So if you have a list, I can type in this command here called length of list, and it tells me that there are 5 pieces of information in this list. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And so now what I can do is I can actually iterate through those pieces of information here by saying, don't give me everything here, but actually go inside each list piece and give me just the text. And so that's what this 0 is over here. This I don't think works in Python 2, so if you're working with Python 2, which I hope you're not, I think that you'll have some trouble at this point here. But if you're working with Python 3, then this should work just fine. But so what I'm doing now is I'm actually able to pull out each of these names exactly as I want them. And I'm going to check one more thing. Type, and we have, I have to type this here, S, oops, before I can do that into this. There we go. S, I'm going to type in exactly everything I have in this thing that I've seen before. And, oops, I've forgotten something here. Oh, you know what? It's that. There we go. So now this is the code that I've just typed in here, and I'm looking at the type, and so this is actually a string, and I like strings because strings allow me to work with other strings without having to convert anything. So this is why, for instance, when I talk about going back to the code, when we are working with strings, it's very helpful if you can go ahead and like put in this str when you're working with your LST or whatever it may be. But if you're working with strings, so for instance, actually put that type after your variable so that it helps you to write code for this. Okay, so I've just created this temporary list of strings that I'm working with. I think what I'm going to do is maybe I'll save the information inside this. I'm making a new list here that just contains the names of my tables. Now I could parse them out each time I wanted to, but this is actually kind of complicated, and I'm getting a little bit. I'm beginning to hyperventilate when I'm thinking about all the work that must be done here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take each one of these. This one over here gives me the name of the table. It actually does the parsing for me. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just put this, oops, append. I'm going to actually take out the name of each table and just add it to my list. I'll run this and show you what I'm talking about in just a second here. So I'll just show you here. My temp list, and each time I do something, I'm going to I'll just print out the list so you can see how it's growing. Okay. If you're getting lost or left behind, don't worry about that. When I first saw this, I thought this was actually insane. But I do think, though, that if you spend some time just coding this or looking at the code and playing with the code, then it will stick. It will make sense to you. Right, I'm going to save this. I'm going to go back to my, where was I working? Here we are. I'm going to exit out of this. Oops. By the way, I have to type in exit, open, close. And I'm going to run my Python 3, and then I have this auto query. S is not defined. Oh, you know what? S is not defined. I can fix that. I can fix that because here I am calling a list that doesn't exist. Actually, my list is this. That's just an error that I made. And I also have to change it up here too because this is just code that I use. One thing that I try and do, which I tend to fail at doing, is when I'm working in Python, when I just call up a session of interactive Python and I start typing commands to see how I can make something happen or how I can work with data. I tend to, I try and use the same variables that I would use in my code so that when I just copy and paste that code, it works. Now, what is this? Well, going back to this code here, what we've done is, remember, we have, every time I'm growing out this temporary list here, let's back up. I create a temporary list. I have another list that SQLite library gave me, which contains my results. I want the names of the tables which are inside this results. I want them out. And then I want to take those table names and I want to put them into this list that I've just created here. So this is like my temporary shelf that I'm going to put everything. Now, this append command here says, whatever comes out of this function over here, whatever that may be, just tack it on to the list. Just add it in there. Just throw it in. And that's exactly what we're doing here. So this piece of information over here, this is actually going through and pulling out the names of the tables in the clutter that we saw earlier. And then those names are going to be then placed into this list as they fall out. And then over here, this piece of information is this is just printing out my list as it grows. So if I run this, how do I get back? There we go. Go back here. And if I run this, you can see that the first iteration puts teaches in there. The second iteration, you're adding department. The third, you're adding instructor, student, and then course. Now, the reason why I'm going through this, I realize that some of you may be confused by all these things. I don't mean to confuse. And I don't, I'm not, you don't need to know this right now, like how this all works. There's no test today. But I am going through this because there will be a time perhaps in this course where you'll be designing a piece of software which does exactly this. And if you have this code in your notes, that's basically what we're doing now. We're making notes. If you have this in your notes, then it will help you to create your own source. And so please don't get frustrated if you've never seen any of this stuff before. We will work through this piece by piece. It'll be absolutely fine. You'll see. But just hold on to this, and then when you have a moment, actually go through and convince yourself that it does work. Now, I'm going to. So I have this name of this. I have my list of tables here. And so next, what I'm going to do is I want to actually remember to query all tables in the database. Names are in temp list. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I have to write another one of these for lists here, or for loops, for my index in temp list, which I have. So that's going to be the word that I'm going to do here. And then what I have to do now is I have to go back and I have to find, for instance, a query string. I'm looking for it. I don't have a query string I can use. Okay, fine. So I'll say that my query string is going to be equal to select star from, and don't forget, I have to use that F there. And this is my query statement here. So really, if I just take out, if I have a select star from, if I have this and I put in the name of the table right here, then I should be able to get like a kind of an exhaustive query of each table here. And so here, I'll just put in this I. In fact, what I'm going to do here is I'll just put print, and I'll put I don't know. Something like this. I'll say current table. Actually, maybe I should probably put in some tabs in here so things don't get so cluttered. But I'll put, for instance, current table. Oops, I don't know why this is jumping around so much. My keyboard is looking a little bit crazy. Acting a little bit weirdly here. Okay, so what this is going to do is now it's going to be making the thing. If I just tell you what, I'm just going to run this right now and make sure that everything's working well, just so you can get an idea about what's happening. It doesn't actually do anything yet. I am creating a query statement, but it doesn't actually do anything as yet. And so if I run this, you see that it says current table teaches, current table department, current table instructor, current table student, and then current table course. That's exactly what I want. It's a bit messy, but whatever. Next, what I'm going to do is I need to somehow put that query into my database. And so that is why, for instance, we have this piece of code up here. You can see this. This is my run query. What I'm going to do is, in fact, I can just take all of this here and then bring it down and copy it. But I'm going to send my query each time I run this thing to this direct or this function that I just created. And that's going to give me the results I want. And then also, don't forget that once the results have come back, in fact, I need to actually say, save the results here. I need something like this, result. I have this parse results here too, which needs to then be sent to actually print everything up. And so then I have this part. Whoops. Okay, so I'll say that my results, I spell that again, results is equal to run queries. That means that run query is going to run, it's going to do its query, it's going to return to me the results, and then I have to go through and actually kind of parse those results so that I get something that's meaningful to me. So I think that's about it. If I just go back to this, I'm going to try and run this. I'll put this back on the screen in a moment. And of course, I'll send you these lists. I'll send you the code here so that you have it. But I think that it does actually work. This is a little bit cluttered here, but let's just see what our results say. I can probably get rid of this. I don't need to have that come up every time. But it's a bit cluttered here because I have this part that says current table teaches. And so now this is the information that's actually coming out of the table. And this is exactly the problem that we had before. Remember where we had to do this step up here to pull out the actual words of the query? Well, if we wanted to get these things out, we'd have to write another function which would actually pull out the words word by word as we're for each of these results here. Otherwise, we have all this other kind of line noise that exists. But you'll see though that we have the query information for department, instructor, student, and course. And so it does work. In fact, I can clean things up just a little bit, perhaps, if you just give me a moment here. Let's see, select from. What I'm going to do is I'll put a print statement down here where I'm actually just going to drop a line. I'm just dropping a line. That's it. And that should give us a little bit, whoops, drop a line. And hopefully, if I run this, I'll put this back up in a second so you have it. There we are. So now it's a little bit more clean, perhaps, so you can kind of see what's going on. I'll send this out, the same code that we were working on. I'll send this out to your class docs repository so that you have it. I do apologize if anything, if what I was talking about today makes no sense to you. I think that if you spend some time and look over the code and kind of get a real feel for it, then it will eventually make some sense, but it may not make some sense today. And I know that first when I saw this code, when I first saw Python code to do this, I thought, why would I need to do that? How crazy is that? But after a while, it does settle in. But I think that you can treat this code as like, now you have this in your files, and so that when we're doing senior project, or not senior project, but when you're doing your senior thesis work or something, you need to use a database, and you want to automate things, you now have the code to make that happen for you. And you might even use this in this class for your project. Anyway, we'll discuss all these later on. Are there any questions I can handle before we actually break? Any questions here? No? All right, everybody, stay well. I will see you all very, very soon. Thank you for your time, and I'll see you next time. It's the weekend, actually, by the way. Happy Friday. Happy Friday.